Welcome to our FDI presentation, Accessibility with Online AI Education. Today we have three presenters. Julie Johnson-Archer is the Director of Online Writing Center. Her work centers on ensuring ACU students and faculty alike have access to exceptional academic writing resources. Amy Armetti is the Assistant Director of the Online Writing Center and divides her time between collaborating with the tutor team, supporting university faculty, and tutoring students, particularly ACU Alpha scholars. And Abby Green, the Senior Manager of Student Wellness, where her work centers on accessibility and overall well-being to support for our students. I'll now hand it over to Julie.
Thank you, Leah. As Abby Green is sharing our slide deck, I want to welcome everybody. Thanks for coming. We appreciate you being here today, and we're excited to share in this space. All right, so to get us started, I want to just again say thanks to Leah, to Dina, to the FDI committee for making room for these discussions this year. I found it very insightful and a really great place to come to learn together. So this session is about ethical uses of AI, and I want to just start off personally by saying I understand some of the challenges and fears as well, sort of on the flip side when it comes to these conversations. In my experience teaching English 111 this year, Dina knows I had so many AIVs for potential AI misuse. Um, and that was time consuming and challenging, when we had students copy and pasting directly from a generative AI when that is not allowed. I've been there firsthand. And so I just want to acknowledge that that's not really going to be the focus of today's session. Our presentation will cover some examples of AI tools in the service of accessibility. Um, so we are going to talk about some specific AI tools, and these aren't necessarily better than other AI tools out there. Um, my cat is joining me. So we aren't necessarily recommending all of these tools as the best ones, but they are some examples that we have experience with our students. Um, Interestingly, during the process of building this presentation, some of the tools we wanted to show changed in their capabilities and not always for the better. Um, and there are just so many tools out there, it's easy to get overwhelmed. So, to help us stay grounded, we will use two ACU student personas to think about how AI tools could be used to increase accessibility for our students. So, we invite you to imagine your students as we go.
And I am going to give us just kind of a brief rundown of our agenda. So, what we're going to be covering in our conversation today. The first thing is I'm actually going to give us an overview of accessibility. So, really defining what it is. So, we kind of have that common foundation and framework to view this conversation, to talk about why it matters. So, who are our students and why is this important for them? And then Julie's going to talk a little bit about the partnership between the Wellness Office and the Writing Center and how we're working to try to address issues of access for students. But the bulk of our time today will be spent actually demoing some tools, like Julie mentioned. So these are going to be tools that are commonly used by the three of us in either one-on-one type coaching sessions in the Writing Center or with myself and my staff in the Wellness Office. But again, this work will be towards access and removing or reducing barriers for students. And then we're going to try to leave some time for questions at the end, but I'd encourage you, if you have questions or thoughts while we're talking, we're going to have a couple of pauses throughout, and Dr. Leah is going to be monitoring the chat for us and interrupt us where those things are relevant. So it'll help us just kind of make sure we're addressing everything as we go. So I will start by just kind of giving us an accessibility overview. And as we're thinking about this concept, I think a question that's really important for us to ask is, what is access? What does that mean? And how do we define it? And most simply, we can think about it as an opportunity to participate in education. So probably most commonly, we hear this talked about in relationship to academic or learning access for students with disabilities, which is kind of part of my wheelhouse. So we can think about, a student who's blind or visually impaired. Do they have access to their course materials? Can they participate in the course the same way a student who has full use of their eyes can? And so that has implications for our formatting, our course design, all those types of things. But I want to push us today to think a little bit more broadly, because of our student population, about the many different forms of access that exist. So we could think about financial access. Do students have the tools, the resources, the literacy to be able to have an opportunity to participate in our courses? Do students have social access? Do they feel like they belong and they're welcome here? Is there any barriers around that for students? We can think about technological access. Our classes are online, right? There's a lot of literacy that goes into being able to understand how to use platforms, how to access courses, the library, et cetera, and so on. And so there can be barriers there. And I put et cetera here, right? Because there's a lot of different angles from which we can think about this concept. But in all of this, the goal of the work of access, of creating opportunities to participate in education, is always to reduce or remove barriers for students, never to lower academic standards. And I think that's really critical that we acknowledge that we recognize that we address that can sometimes be a misconception as we think about this work, is that, oh, this is making it easier for students to participate. And that is never the goal. I also want to talk about, if you've been around me for any length of time, you've probably heard me say this, but access does not guarantee success. So this work of reducing or removing barriers does not mean that a student is always going to be successful. It doesn't mean a student's always going to make an A. And that's important a lot of times for students to hear, particularly the students I'm working with, but also I think for all of us, right? That is a reality, that students can have access and still not be successful. And then the last thing I want to talk about is just proactive access versus reactive access. Proactive can be, us thinking ahead about our different learner personas, evaluating our areas of influence, thinking about, are there barriers here that we are creating? Could we work to remove some of them? Universal design is one we think about a lot in the academic space. There are other ways to think about it. But there's also reactive access. And those are two sides of the same coin that are really important. That reactive access, accommodations for students, are a great example of that. We know that we won't ever be able to make an environment 100% accessible. We just can't. So those reactive forms of accessibility are really, really important to how we kind of approach this work from different angles. The reason I wanted to talk about these last 3 bullet points is because this is really what I want our framework to be as we're thinking about AI and how students can use it to increase their access. So we are talking about, like Julie said, ethical, responsible use of AI that's helping students to recognize how can they use it to reduce or remove barriers, not to lower academic standards. And we also recognize that them using AI doesn't mean that they're going to be successful, right? And that's something we can talk to them about. But most importantly, this is also a proactive form, right? This is something as a tool that I can give to a student and empower them to reduce or remove their own barriers, rather than them having to react and come to me and say, well, I need an accommodation for XYZ, right? So this is a really important tool for our students. I will go forward here and just do a little bit more of a deep dive of accessibility at ACU. So really applying this to an evaluation of who are our students. So this chart here on the left is reflecting percentages of the student body that are registered with a disabilities office on their college campus. So these top 2 are going to be reflecting kind of nationwide averages. And these bottom 2 are reflecting what's true of students at ACU online. So this is excluding our residential population. This is really focused on our students. So you're going to see that the top 2 are cumulatively over 30%. And the bottom 2, both of these numbers should be rounded up. It's like 4.7. 2.8. So we're looking at cumulatively about 8% of our students. And I don't put this on here for us to pat ourselves on the back and say, man, we're crushing it. In a lot of ways, I think we are, right? We can think about our online environment is going to remove a lot of barriers that students experience in a residential setting. Even think of something like going to class, right? Our students, if you have a family, if you work a full-time job, that's a barrier for you that the online space evaporates and really creates access for students. But I put this here for us to think about, okay, these 8% of students that are here, first of all, we know all these numbers are lower than actual, I should say that, but these 8% their layers, their barriers that are remaining are going to be multifaceted and really challenging to address. And a lot of times, an accommodation is not going to be a one size fits all response to what's happening with them. And so, AI is allowing us to get more of the root of things and to address some of the ways that disability impacts and intersects with life stage and those types of things in a way that we weren't able to do before. The second thing I wanted to talk about here is what are the most common diagnoses that we see in our students and are working with on a regular basis. Psychiatric and learning disabilities are what you're going to see in the top categories, again, across the country, which makes a lot of sense if you think about mental health conditions and the rise of that over the last 10 to 15 years. And then we also know that K-12 is doing a really good job of identifying students and helping them find early intervention. So those are going to naturally kind of roll right into that traditional 18 to 22 college setting. For us, we don't have a great way to track aggregate diagnostic data. But we can kind of anecdotally, for me, this is what I saw is true, and Julie and Emmy echoed this. We're going to see a lot of students coming forward with ADHD. And the reason for that is, again, a lot of those barriers that they would face in a residential setting don't exist. But if you think about things that are hard for people with ADHD or neurodivergence, is organization, staying on track, procrastination, those executive functioning skills, and those are going to rise up really quickly in a self-directed learning environment. And again, we can react with accommodations, but those don't always address the root of the issue and actually make a difference for students. And AI is totally changing the ways that we're able to equip these students to reduce or remove the barriers that they're experiencing. And then the last thing I'll say here before I pass it to Julie is I've kind of been hinting at this, but I want to talk about why does accessibility matter for our adult learners? So we know that most of our students are in the average age range of 35 to 40. So they're in that more non-traditional, post-traditional student category. So we know they've faced a lot of barriers in their educational journey up until this point, and they're going to continue to experience barriers while they're students with us. And a lot of these students are experiencing barriers that have nothing to do with a disability. And so that means an accommodation is not an option for them. So these AI tools that we're talking about today are helping us sort of bridge the gap for these students to be able to provide, again, a proactive tool, a resource that's going to help them be able to address some of their access issues for which there isn't like a federally protected option like accommodation. So an example of this, you could think about a student who has a spouse or a child that's experiencing a significant health crisis. We've had students whose spouse is diagnosed with cancer or their child gets diagnosed with something really significant. Accommodations are not an option for that student, but they're going to experience barriers, and these AI tools will help us to be able to address those things. So if you've been around me for any length of time, I've said if it's good for a student with a disability, it's good for all of our students. And I think what we're talking about today is going to show that in a really profound way. Emmy's going to demo in a couple minutes or talk us through two different learner personas. Julie mentioned that, one of which we intentionally crafted to reflect a student with a disability and one without. So that, again, we can think about this in a broad and conceptual way to apply it to all of our students.
Yeah, that's a great framework for our conversation. Thanks, Abby. The reason we are partnering at all with Abby and the Writing Center, I just want to touch on this, is that we work together a lot. So, as you know, in the Writing Center, we're supporting the development of writing skills and writing competence for students across the board. And we have a great partnership with the Student Wellness Office to provide specific accommodations when those are needed and general writing resources for students when they need them. And the Writing Center is itself one of the resources, but within the Writing Center, we have a lot of writing tools that we share with students. And nowadays, in our one-on-one conversations with students, sometimes these tools that we are helping students use in the service of their development as writers, sometimes these tools now include AI tools. So I want us to pause here before we dive in. Just take a moment to reflect, and if you'd like to share in the chat, you're welcome to. You don't need to at this point if you'd like to just think. What are some of the barriers your students have faced? You might know some off the top of your head. You're talking with people this week about them. But if you'd like, you can also consider what are some of the barriers you faced as a student. So just take a moment to think about that as we continue.
This is Emmy. As Julie and Abby mentioned, we're going to contextualize our discussion in a couple of learner personas that are composites of real ACU students, and we're going to consider them within a frame of real ACU course demands. So for student one, we would like you to meet Jordan. Jordan is a first-year psychology major who has ADHD and a nonspecific reading disability. Jordan is taking SIO 120, which means they have to engage with a variety of source types. There's a psychology textbook, videos, peer-reviewed sources from the library, and applied readings from sites like Psychology Today and the American Psychological Association. The course assignments include weekly online discussions, worksheets, short papers, usually about 2 to 3 pages, written in APA style, and there's a screencast presentation. So in this context for Jordan, the biggest hurdles are reading load, especially long or complex academic texts that require multiple passes to understand. In terms of writing, the course's frequent short papers demand strong organization, attention to APA format, and careful editing. And all of these are overwhelming given Jordan's attention with challenges with executive function. And attention, let's consider attention regulation. Although we may think that accessing information through different sources like videos is helpful, shifting between the media can actually make it harder for students with ADHD to stay focused. So finally, the flexibility of online learning, as we've mentioned, is great because it allows Jordan to work at their own pace. But with reduced scaffolding and lack of in-person accountability, that actually also makes it harder for them to stay on track. On the flip side, Jordan's really motivated by the subject matter, especially topics like memory and cognition, in part because of their own unique learning characteristics. With all this in mind, accessible strategies and supports are going to help this student focus less on battling barriers and more on engaging meaningfully with this content that is so important to them. Next, learner persona 2 has arrived. Alex is a first semester graduate student in our marriage and family therapy program, and they're enrolled in MFTO 601, the pre-internship course. Alex is an adult learner who works full-time, cares for 3 children and their aging parent, and they are managing ongoing financial concerns. Notably, as Abby brought up, Alex lacks a formal diagnosis that's going to support formal academic accommodations. But the combination of their responsibilities causes them anxiety, and all of this combined definitely impacts their learning experience. Let's think about the course that they're taking. MFTO 601 is a foundational course that introduces students to many dimensions of the MFT program. Alex has to engage with 5 textbooks, which I mean, I would have trouble keeping 5 textbooks together. There are professional resources from the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy. They have to do some networking regarding internship sites during this course. They're engaging with peer-reviewed journal articles and clinical demonstration videos. In terms of their assignments, they have 2 weekly discussion posts. They have short written papers with a high emphasis on APA accuracy. They have to do role play videos of clinical skills, which requires engaging one or a pair of friends or family to participate in making the videos. And they also have to do what they call a genogram, which is a diagram that kind of lays out the dynamics and patterns of their family of origin. So in this context, for Alex, the biggest hurdles include time constraints. Obviously, balancing full-time work, caregiving, and school makes it really difficult to manage the rapid pace of deadlines in our 7-week courses. In terms of emotional demands, we may not think about this, but creating a genogram can actually be very stressful and deeply personal, especially when layered on top of Alex's caregiving responsibilities with their children and their parent. Next, recording role plays and using the software to make the genogram adds technological challenges just on top of the basic academic tasks. So for Alex, the flexibility of online learning is also great because they can fit school around family and work. But in this context, limited interaction with professors and even with their cohort can increase their sense of isolation as they're trying to learn and build their professional identity. Alex, though, is super motivated by their commitment to becoming a marriage and family therapist. And as they may uncover during their genogram assignment, they bring valuable lived experiences to their studies. So intentional strategies and support are really going to help Alex successfully manage their academic and personal demands while they build their professional identity. So with these learner personas in mind, we're going to cross into a discussion of AI-driven tools. But before we do, we wanted to lay out a few assumptions and ground rules regarding these tools. First off, we are assuming that AI as a tool can reduce barriers and enable deeper engagement with learning. With guidance, users can build ethical practices that support rather than bypass the learning process. In terms of ground rules, we acknowledge that ethical AI use means the user must acknowledge and take responsibility for their AI use. And finally, we always need to be clear with students regarding what degree of AI use is acceptable or needed in our fields. With that, I'll footnote that the strategies we're going to share are ones that Julie, Abby, and I deem acceptable in our fields of writing center work, disability support, and student wellness, where we're focusing on human-centered practice, effective communication, critical reflection, and especially student agency. So with that, we're going to start out by exploring a free AI-powered web application that's called Goblin Tools. They do have a little goblin. He's not on the screen, but he's a little friend if you go visit Goblin Tools at goblin.tools. Goblin Tools is a suite of tools designed to assist neurodivergent individuals with tasks that they find overwhelming or difficult. So the suite as a whole helps with executive function, organization, and communication. But we're going to look at some creative uses for two tools that will support writing and communication. First one's the formalizer, and the second is called the judge. So first, you remember Jordan, our undergraduate student taking SCIO 120. They have ADHD and a reading disability, which makes organizing and presenting thoughts in APA papers challenging. So Jordan might find the formalizer to be helpful because its purpose is to refine text for clarity and style. The student can input a short passage of text, and no matter how messy it is, like this example that I put in the top field of the image on the slide, the formalizer will organize it and transform it into a style that they select from the drop-down menu. My suggestion is to use the Make My Text More Professional option for academic writing or email because it offers clarity without excessive formality. And a great thing about this is after the user runs the passage through the tool, they can click the Convert button again to see a different version. Of course, the students should avoid copying and pasting the output directly into their papers, but what the tool generates can be used as a model, like an exemplar, to learn about structure and clarity. Importantly, here's the creative part. I found that this tool is really useful for writers who struggle to paraphrase. A common paraphrasing strategy is that we read the text, we look away, we write it in our own words, and then we look back at the original to verify that the meaning matches. So what Jordan could do is read the text, then type or even speak, you see the little microphone option there, the paraphrase into the formalizer. This allows them to use whichever way they express themselves best, and then they can compare the result to the original passage. Really cool is that creating different conversions actually allows you to access models that, through the different textual arrangements, can emphasize different points of the original text or of the paraphrase. So then the student can critically evaluate, what is the best way to fit this information from the other author into my own argument? So it becomes a really cool way for them to interact and think about it. They're not just text spinning something through an AI. It's a collaborative process, a critical thinking process. Um, but another benefit of the formalizer is that it reduces cognitive load because it will let Jordan focus just on the ideas instead of simultaneously wrestling with the language mechanics, which makes this aspect of the writing process and the learning process more accessible. Of course, students use their accepted friend Grammarly to help clarify text and offload editing all the time. But I have actually found that when students with more severe challenges write really, really messy, tangled sentences, Grammarly rewrites their ideas into something that's inaccurate to their intended meaning. For instance, if you've talked to me, you may have heard about my work with a current ACU student who has a traumatic brain injury. And I have advised them not to use Grammarly for this reason. On the other hand, an AI-powered tool like the Formalizer tends actually to be more accurate with their work. And when I'm working with the student asynchronously, with my background, I can read pretty much anybody's writing. But with this student, in a 3 or 4 page paper, there might be a sentence that I just can't sort out. And if I can't tease out the meaning from it, I'll put it through the Formalizer or through Google Gemini. And then it'll make the light bulb go off in my own head so that I can then go back to the student to help them clarify um, the meaning so that others can understand their usually fantastically awesome and profound idea. Um, so that's the formalizer. Next, we are going to talk about the judge. I am on the autistic spectrum, and the judge is a tool that I use myself on occasion to help analyze tone in emails and written communications. So, aside from helping with the anxiety people with autism might feel when they're trying to communicate, especially asynchronously, this tool is really valuable for students like Alex, our student number 2, when stress from balancing caregiving and coursework can seep into their professional messages or lead them to misinterpret an incoming email. The judge assists by checking for tone. So you paste the text in and you click the judge button, and it will judge whether the message sounds polite, assertive, frustrated, unclear, etc. And if you click the suggest a response button, it can also suggest models of appropriate language to respond to a communication. So if Alex received the email pictured in the middle image about, oh, you did not submit your part of our group project yet, eek, they could use the judge to review the tone. And then seeing that the sender is indeed irritated, they could click suggest a response, which would generate a model for a return email that would help them maintain a healthy relationship with their peer. But if we flip the perspective, what if Alex is under strain and they are writing frazzled emails where their emotion is leaking through? They can run it through the judge to see that the tone is not the best, and then they can use it in combination with the formalizer that we just looked at to generate edits that would moderate overly emotional or ambiguous language by using the make this more polite option. Um, In high stress moments, Julie brought this up the other day when we were talking about this. We might turn to a mentor, a friend, a spouse, even our teenage kid that lives with us and say, hey, can you read this for me and tell me, is my tone bad or do you think this person is upset with me? But for a student like Alex who feels isolated, a lack of a mentor or other accessible supporter is yet another barrier that they need to overcome. So these tools in combination can help avoid miscommunication, maintain professionalism, and reduce anxiety. Before I pass it back to Abby, we're going to look very quickly at one advantage and a couple of caveats of Goblin tools. The biggest advantage of Goblin tools is that they do not require prompting. The user just clicks on the tool, puts in their text, and they get a response. And this design means there's a very low learning curve compared to learning to use AI platforms like Gemini or Perplexity. And this makes Goblin tools really accessible for students who experience cognitive overload, time constraints, or anxiety, or who just need really simple, straightforward, fast support. On the other hand, there are limitations. First, in terms of transparency, this bothers me that Goblin Tools does not disclose which AI models they are running on the back end. They only note that they mix open and closed source providers and try to use ethical tools. So therefore, these are not tools where we would encourage students to put confidential information or specific course content. The Goblin Tools creator also acknowledges that accuracy can vary. As you see in this output from their time estimator, I cannot read a psychology textbook chapter in 1 or 5 minutes. And if I have a reading disability, I definitely can't read it in 1 or 5 minutes. But as with any AI-driven resource, we have to encourage students to double check, consider the tools as guides instead of absolute authorities, even as they're seeking to reduce barriers. And this goes back to our ground rule that the user is ultimately responsible for any AI output. They can't go back to their professor and say, I didn't finish everything because I thought it was only going to take me 5 minutes to read each chapter because that's what Goblin Tools told me. So it does go back on them. And now we're going back to Abby.
Yes. So I'm going to talk about Gemini, which I'm not going to labor this too much because I think all of us are more familiar with the Gemini type model. I will note that IT came out with some very recent guidance. IT at ACU did around some AI platforms, and this was one that was endorsed. We have access to Gemini for education, both students and staff and faculty do. And this level of Gemini is specifically made for education. There's some really good protections around how the information that's inputted is being used. And so an advantage of this is that this would be a space that students would be safe to enter in more specific information about assignments and things that are going on in our courses. So Gemini, thinking specifically about student two, so this is Alex, who has lots of things that are happening in their life. And so one of the barriers that they're experiencing is around time management. And this tool, Gemini, can help with scheduling and prioritizing. So this screenshot here is of a prompt I just made up, but have done many times with students. The disadvantage of this is obviously this is a pretty complicated prompt. And even when I ran it, I realized, oh my goodness, I forgot to tell Gemini that a lot of our courses, the week begins on a Tuesday and runs through a Monday. So the output was not correct and having to rerun it. The advantage of this is as I work with students and we develop this prompt, this is something that is sort of a souvenir for them, right? They can take this back to their own life and use this week to week, right? It's editable. They can change the few things that need to be changed when their rhythms and their family change, or as the course material changes as each week, or even course to course. So it's giving them kind of a consistent framework, at least to work from, and then be able to feel confident manipulating as they need to. So on this next slide, I just grabbed some screenshots of the outputs. And this has the ability to kind of give you multiple options in terms of granularity. So obviously here on the left, this is almost hour by hour for the student. And there are students for which they need to know, okay, from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m., this is what I'm doing. And from 10 a.m., because their lives are so full and they're asking the question of how can I even fit this into my life? Like, what does this look like? I have all these things to read. When am I going to read them? And so just having that plan to follow can help them to execute and sort of balance everything that's going on in their life. On the right is more of a daily structure. So this is less, hey, read chapter 1 at this time, but helping a student to identify where are those blocks of time that they can work on their assignments. So for this student, in this example, they have an hour at lunch and then an hour and a half at night. So that's 2.5 hours during the day that they can work on school. That should be sufficient for them to be able to make progress on their assignments. And oftentimes I hear students, well, I just don't know. I don't think I can do it. I don't have the time. And so that leads to them shutting down. And then when we run this, they go, oh, wait, I can do this. I do have blocks of time. And it just removes that cognitive load of having to figure all of this out on their own. Gemini can do it for them in like 30 seconds. And so that's a really great use of this tool for a student that falls into that more overloaded student 2 category. I'll also talk about it briefly for student 1. So we can also use this when we're thinking about students who experience barriers related to executive functioning, organizing, even being able to break down a task or follow or move it into sort of a linear pattern. Some of those processing disorders can impact that. And so Gemini can help with task breakdown. So in this example, I took the first assignment from Psychology 120, and I asked Gemini to break the assignment down, break the assignment prompt down into steps for me to follow to complete the assignment. So this is simply rearranging what is written on that prompt and rewording it to be more conversational. So sometimes vocab can be a stumbling block for students in understanding what they're supposed to be doing. But this can take a student who's not able to go, okay, where do I start? Where do I go next? How do I finish and make sure I've completed everything? It can take a student in those categories, oh gosh, days and days and days to get started on something. We know when there's ADHD present, a lot of times that quickly moves into procrastination when the student feels overwhelmed. And so they'll procrastinate 2, 3, 4 days, and then they end up coming to me and saying, well, I need an accommodation for more time on my assignments. And when we unpack it, it's not that time is a barrier, it's about managing and organizing that time. So if I give a student more time as an accommodation, well, guess what? They're just going to have the same struggles for longer. And so this tool is really changing the way that we can actually impact that skill set, right? And teach them what does it look like to break things down. I've seen students go from turning things in super late to being able to get them in on time simply because they're able to follow steps and they don't feel as overwhelmed. So procrastination is not as tempting for them. And the great thing about this is that the student, this is a model, right? It's teaching them, okay, I can look at my prompt, I can look at what Gemini is outputting, and I can start to train my muscles to understand, okay, how did they break that down? And where did they, they're learning a pattern. And I think that's really important as we're thinking about increasing their self-sufficiency and those, again, addressing those skill gaps in a really profound way. So that is what we're going to talk about Gemini. I just want to pause here for a second. Julie, I believe it's Julie that's going to pick up after this. But we just kind of wanted to give you a moment. Again, we're not asking you necessarily to share anything here, but just take a moment to kind of check in with yourself. We recognize, again, that there's a lot of different perspectives on AI and these tools and how students can use them. And so we just want to give people a space to recognize, is there something that's coming up for you, either in a positive way or maybe in a negative way, and just giving you a space to kind of take note of that as we continue to roll on through. I think we have 2 more tools to go.
Yeah, thanks, Abby. So this is our second to last tool we'll use today, which is Perplexity AI. This is similar to ChatGPT, search engine AI. So I signed into Perplexity with my ACU account for free. If you want to try this out, you can do as well if you haven't already. And I want to note, if you do, this is something we tell students as well. In the settings in Perplexity, in this example, it's really easy to go in and exclude your data from training the AI model. In the ACU IT statement that just came out, that's one of the priorities is protecting university data. And so if you're a student, or if you're a student or you use Perplexity, make sure you just turn off data retention in the settings, and you can explore that with any AI tool, but that's what it's called for this one. So remember our student Jordan, the new undergraduate psychology student, has a harder time understanding complex texts like peer-reviewed journal articles, which for him require multiple read-throughs. In order to help Jordan avoid spending way too much time with an article that may or may not even be useful for his assignment, Perplexity could be a helpful tool to summarize the article first. So here's the prompt we used. You can go to the next slide. We provided a template on the previous slide, which you can access. And then this is what we actually typed in to Perplexity. Summarize the main points of this article for me at a middle school reading level with page numbers, focusing on answering these assignment questions. And I just made up an example assignment for this one, but kind of followed the example of many Psychology 120 assignments. So we listed those in bullet point, and then I attached a journal article that I found from the ACU library. So it's not one of their course assigned readings, but sometimes, these new undergraduate students are being prompted to go find a peer-reviewed article. They have very little experience doing that and reading those types, that genre. And so I just found an article and attached it there. So this is the beginning of the output from Perplexity. And notice that the reading notes are organized by the assignment prompt topics, but they do not answer the prompt questions for the student. This is just a topic, a way of organizing the notes by topic. Notes are simplified to the middle school reading level in this example, which just helps this new undergraduate student, Jordan, gain an initial comprehension of the complex scientific article. It also includes page numbers because we prompted it to, which encourages the student to go back to the source and critically reread or analyze that output. So next slide. For comparison, the title of that article I used, it's a real article. The title is "The Mere Presence of a Smartphone Reduces Basal Attentional Performance." Did you get that? Like, you might, but an undergrad student might hear that and go in one ear and out the other. So the output summarized that the article shows that just having a smartphone nearby without using it can make it harder to focus and pay attention. Okay, let's go to page 1, page 5 of that article and see where it says that. But I can follow that a lot easier than even just the title of the article. And after reading the article, I did find the notes to be accurate and just helpfully simplified. So additional features include the view in file, which allows you to compare the notes with the original text side by side. Essentially, this is the same as giving a new theology student a King James Version Bible with that newer, easy to read version printed side by side. So I like to think about how can we give that to a new psychology student who's trying to explore this complex scientific research in an easier to read format. The check the sources option is also there. It allows you to see any sources used in the output. In this case, the article I uploaded was the only source, so we can control that as well with this particular tool. Then, as always, with any AI tool, one risk that Jordan might be tempted is to copy and paste from the notes, especially at the end, where it wrote a few reflection sentences in first person. So, in the context of a writing center session with Jordan, we can and we already do discourage that misuse of the tool, and instead we support students in understanding the ethical boundaries of AI use. Like, okay, this is a good model. Now let's think of an example from your perspective and your life. So overall, I found this one to be a good tool that helps students improve their reading comprehension if that's a barrier.
Okay, and we're doing great on time, and this is our last tool that we're going to be talking about and walking through today. This tool is called Notebook LM. This is another tool that we already had in our presentation, but just so happened to be endorsed in that IT statement that came out in the last week. And this is a tool, man, I love this tool so much and am constantly introducing students to it. This is not generative AI in the same way as a Perplexity, a ChatGPT, a Gemini. This is really working with the material that students themselves upload into the AI tool. So what I like about this is it is allowing students to take multiple formats. So this could be, textbook pages. It could be journal articles, it could be websites, it could be YouTube videos that have transcripts, anything that has that written component, even though it's in kind of multiple formats or modalities there. You can put it into the tool, and then it allows them to then take that and manipulate it into different modalities and learning preferences. There's not a lot of opportunities we have to accommodate students' learning preferences. We have students that say, well, I'm an auditory learner, or I need things visually. And we can't really do that in a lot of ways in our courses, designed for all of that. But this tool is kind of allowing students to have that independence to manipulate things in a way that works best for the way that they learn. So this tool is really helpful for students that have barriers around reading comprehension or processing. So this can be good for both student 1 and 2 that we've talked about, especially if students have time constraints where it helps them to be able to interact with sources more efficiently. And so this is going to, again, help with understanding course material. So this screenshot here is a notebook that I created. A notebook is really simply just a collection of uploads. So this is really helpful thinking about students who are in programs for which licensure is the end goal. So thinking about communication science disorders, social work, marriage and family therapy, they could create a notebook for each week in each course, or even potentially for each course, and then go back later and be able to interact with that material, refresh themselves as they're preparing for that licensure exam. And so I think that can be a really helpful way to use this. But anyways, it's just a collection. This is actually a collection of uploads from Core 115. That's the course that I teach and I'm teaching right now. And so I just grabbed the readings from week 1 and uploaded them. Some of them are videos, some of them are actual readings or articles, websites, but all of those get loaded into there. And then from there, it's going to give you your classic AI, your AI overview that you're seeing a lot on Google and other places as you search for things. So it's kind of going to give you that brief overview. And then from there, you can ask questions of what you've uploaded. So it's going to look very similar in format to a ChatGPT or a Gemini or a Perplexity. But again, it's really only working with the sources that you have given it. So I asked the question of this example, what is critical thinking, which is a foundation of our Core 115 course. And then Notebook LM is going to output an answer for me where it's pulling from my readings and kind of summarizing things. You'll see the little circles out to the right where it is allowing you to then click on that and see exactly which source it pulled from. And it will show you where in that source it's pulling from. So that's really important for students to be able to interact with more confidence with those original sources, and also being able to cite that and give credit where appropriate. But again, it's just going to help them bring together multiple sources into one understanding. So that's something we see some students have a barrier with, is how do I connect my sources together to address a course prompt or discussion post, something like that. Now, obviously, there is a limitation of students could copy and paste this, just like what Julie was saying with Perplexity. However, that's something obviously we're discouraging and talking to them about, hey, this is a model. And you can use this again to interact with your sources and come up with paraphrases and know exactly where to look as you're working to answer the questions that are in the prompt for you. The other things that I really like about this is it can generate a student a briefing document. I don't know why it has the date that it does on here. That's something I'm still wondering about, but it is essentially going to put a high-level summary of all the sources into an outline format. And it's going to make that language a little bit easier to read. So particularly, again, if you're seeing students interact with a lot of these journal articles, this can help them just kind of be able to get the gist of things. And it's telling you which source it came from. So again, they can go back, but it can increase that comprehension. And again, kind of molding all those things together into one understanding, bringing all of those sources together. The last couple of things I'll show here is that it does allow a student to generate a mind map out of their notebook. So if you have a student that's like, I learn best visually, well, great. We can allow you to interact with this. It moves as you click on different things and goes to different levels, and it's eventually going to route them back to the original source. And so I think that's really important, but it can help them visually just kind of walk down through the different paths. also, since we made this presentation, I think we realized this week as we were working through things, Notebook LM has come out with a video option. So you can ask it to generate an AI video based on the sources. And so if a student likes to watch things, I played with it this week just to see what does this look like. And it's almost like if you've ever watched one of the Bible Project videos where they're talking and then someone's drawing kind of at the same time. And I find that students really like that type of thing. And so that video is now an option. And the very last thing it can do that I think is awesome is generate an audio podcast. So this is becoming more common with some of the AI tools around comprehension and reading, is to be able to take those sources and write a AI script and have these AI generated voices talk back and forth like a podcast. So I've linked one here. It's kind of clunky to share in this space, but we're going to send out the slides afterwards. So feel free to click on this. Hopefully it'll work. If it doesn't, let me know and I can send you an example, or you can play around with it yourself. I forgot to mention, this is a free tool through the Google Suite. So you have access to this through your ACU education workspace. So I really like the voices in it. It doesn't sound super robotic. It's back and forth. It makes the material more conversational, which again, if we have students that for disability sake or just for preference learn better auditorily, that gives them an option to consume this in a format that works best for them. Also, this is great for students who are really busy, like our student Alex. If you're on the go, this is something that a student could consume on their commute or while they're sitting at their kid's really loud soccer game or swim meet or something where it'd be hard to kind of sit down and read something. It's increasing their access to be able to consume and learn in the spaces where they are. So that's our last tool. We did want to leave just with a reflection question. I'd actually love for you guys to drop these in the chat if you're willing, not a requirement, but just if you're willing, to just think about what tools from our conversation today stand out to you, and how do you think you or one of your students could remove a learning barrier with one of these tools. So we can give a couple seconds for folks to do that. And then Dr. Lee, I don't know if there's some questions. I haven't been watching the chat because I'm bad at multitasking, but would love to answer anything that we can.
There were just a lot of comments, not really questions.
Okay.
Let me see.
Great.
And Julie answered some of the statements in here, which is good.
Well, we can just give folks a second then, I guess, before we wrap up to reflect on this. And if there's any other questions that are coming to mind right now, feel free to let us know.
I think a lot of people need to reflect on this a lot. And but don't forget about our table talk Thursday, October 25th at 11 a.m. And our presenters will be available for more conversation if y'all want to come to that too. We're commenting right now. Let's see. Thank you for this, guys. It's really good.
Thank you for letting us come and share. Like we said, if anyone has specific questions, y'all know how to find us via email or Google Chat or Zoom or whatever, if there's anything else that we can talk through or help with. But otherwise, we're really grateful that y'all came today and for your input and your thoughts. And we hope to see you on, I believe is it September 25th or October 25th, Dr. Lee? I just want to clarify
We have it
the
on
date.
the next slide.
Oh, we do? Oh, because Julie did it because she's the best.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, it's September.
September 25th. Yeah. Thank you. This is really good.